You're listening to the Yeshiva of Newark at IDT podcast. I'm your host and curator, Rabbi Abram Kibalevich, and I hope you enjoy this episode. You've bought your tickets. The ushers are about to open the doors. Yes, the Projectionist has Semicha is about to start. But first, if you own a retail business and accept credit cards, your customers are getting points, miles, and all sorts of rewards every time they use their card. And you're paying the price. That's why NRS Pay, a product of National Retail Solutions, a division of the IDT Corporation, offers its cash discount program FeeBuster. You can start accepting credit cards for free. If your business processes over $18,000 a month, you pay no monthly fee and $0 out of your pocket for transaction. This means you, as a retailer, can enjoy the benefits of accepting plastic, and your customers still get those crucial miles they crave and need. NRS Pay FeeBuster provides every client with a free credit card reader with no long-term contract, no early termination fee, cancel anytime without a penalty. I'm personally familiar with this company, and they truly stand by their product, and they'll help you with live, stateside-based customer service on any issue or question. Visit nrspay.com or call 833-289-2767 to learn more about NRS Pay and the fantastically fair FeeBuster. Clear the aisles, the Projectionist. Smicha. Hi, I'm here with Yitzchak Kolakowski. And most occasions, Yitzchak and I sort of like circle around each other, both movie aficionados, devotees, experts, as you will, darshanim. But usually I tend for some of the Hollywood classics, highbrows, or some perhaps a little known film noir that has some sort of important meaning for today. And Yitzchak consistently brings out some of the movies that were some of science fiction's interesting entries, something sometimes called schlock, sometimes called monster flicks. But I think here, although we've come to appreciate each other's interests, here we have a film that we both really, really like, even before we ever knew of each other. But this is a film that I discovered, I guess, one late night when they used to have the CBS movie, I think it was, like at 10:30 after the local news. And I guess I must have seen it probably around 1970, I guess is when I saw this movie for the first time. And it was shown on sort of network TV. I'm talking about 1960s Wolf Rilla, this is the director, The Village of the Damned. We've mentioned it before, just in passing, but it has as its star one of my favorite villains, George Sanders, who in this film plays sort of really plays the hero, but who in at least in one part of the film really contemplates something somewhat quite villainous, and that is to allow these monstrous children who have landed in a way on our planet. Now, they didn't really land on the planet in the normal way. They are children that have been, there's somehow aliens have implanted into the wombs of women still able to bear children in towns across the world, as it's discovered later. And these women all, after the whole town is blanketed by a blackout, which sort of like puts everyone in a sleep that's impossible to wake from. After a few hours, everyone seems to be back to normal, and the women in these towns are discovered to be pregnant. As the film elucidates, in various sections throughout the planet, the aliens have dropped their seed into these women, and within a few months, not your usual 9-month pregnancy, but a much quicker gestation period, releases a huge, wonderfully formed, incredibly mature for their baby's eyes, these alien beings who are emotionless, who age within a year and a half. They already look like 4 or 5-year-olds. And by the time they're 2 or 3, they're actually already 9, 10, 11, or 12. And they have the power to control people's minds, and they can get people to do anything. They could cause people to shoot themselves. They could create hazards. They have maybe even the power of telekinesis. I don't remember exactly. I mean, they seem to have incredible powers, and they are all like a hive mind. They all, what one learns, the others all learn instantaneously. It sounds like something that has been done over and over again, and that's true. It has. Whether it's the Borg or whether it's other films. Now, of course, there are films like Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which has a different type of horror. Here, of course, it's the children. And this demon spawn, although it's never, ever confirmed where they're from, they clearly represent a threat to humanity. Now, I guess their threat is because they are going to, I guess, continue to grow and take over people's minds, and perhaps, this planet is the planet. I mean, because Baruch Hashem, there's no explication. Unlike some of these other weaker films where what was really behind everything, becomes some serial villain describes what exactly is the plot and what they're actually after. You sort of just get it because here are these children that have come out of the wombs of sometimes women who are desperate to have children, who have been unsuccessful up until this point, or young girls who are shamed originally, or old housewives whose husbands have not been away and they are suspected of adultery. These children, of course, don't really care so much about their birth mothers. And of course, their fathers aren't really their fathers, although in the film, the star child, played by Martin Stevens, I found out, Yitzchak, that it wasn't Martin Stevens' voice. They used an adult woman, a la Bart Simpson. So I'm not sure exactly what Martin Stevens did. I guess he was lip syncing, or I guess perhaps they thought, his voice just didn't really have the tenor or the sound that they wanted.
I've met him as an adult, and just very briefly, I thanked him for showing up at a convention that was in New Jersey. So many other people at the convention, so I didn't have any conversation with him or get his autograph.
I've talked about his incredible role about a year later in The Innocents, where he actually plays a very mature adult role. Here too, again, he's obviously playing older than his years. And he is sort of the leader of this group, like as a really horror apocalyptic film. But actually, it centers in on this English town. Now, of course, the film is based on I guess it was somewhat of a hit science fiction novel in 1957 by John Wyndham. Off pod, I read to you from his Wikipedia page that the man had about 7 or 8 names, and he had been writing since his early 20s for all different types of publications in the United States as well. A lot of potboiler science fiction, detective stuff, and that seems to be one of the ways he was able to put some food on his table. But he really started hitting it out of the park with his science fiction novels of the 1950s, writing under the name John Wyndham, which is a shortened version of his complete name. And of course, The Day of the Triffids, which is about, it's clear what, the aliens have landed and they have their tripods setting up everywhere, a la H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds. But then you have, his book, The Midwich Cuckoos. And although I haven't done research on it, I think it's clear why he calls it the Midwich Cuckoos. Midwich is the city, this little hamlet and village where this all takes place, where one of the places on Earth it takes place, and this is where the novel is set. And I don't remember, I think I read the novel after I saw the movie. I went out to find it. And I think the reason why it's called cuckoos, and I think I told you this before, Yitzchak, is because the cuckoo bird is a bird that drives out the original bird that has formed the nest, takes it over for himself. And really, it becomes extremely aggressive in that way. And
well, it places she places her own eggs.
It places her own eggs in the nest of
another
others.
bird, and forces the other bird to raise her children.
So I think that's why the cuckoos were actually was what was going on here. They were using human women to actually, I guess, give that aspect of DNA that was necessary to form these beings. But they're, the whatever the alien spirit, the tsura, that was given in by, obviously beings that were beyond our level. in terms of intellect and understanding.
Well, the interesting thing was in the book there was much more of an explicit alien presence. You actually saw, it was described. They described the flying saucers being over the town until and then all the people blacking out and then waking.
In other words, they saw saucers.
Yeah, in the movie, I guess mostly because of
it would cost less. Yes.
Yeah. But it winds up, even though it's a budgetary issue.
Oh, it's much better.
It's much better without it.
Yeah. The sense of mystery is increased. It really is, by the way, and I think many people have seen the film have complained about how it spends such a long time in the setup, and I actually love that. You really get a sense of life in a small English town. You get a sense of the fealty of the community to the military, because in the beginning it's the military who think perhaps it's some sort of Russian or some other sort of attempt by who knows what sort of nefarious communist power to do something. And you see, the stodgy old British stiff upper lip guys trying to figure out what's going on, and you see it from their point of view. And it was just marvelous. Even the village itself, you have your typical sort of the kindly, somewhat worldly doctor who's caring for all these women. And you have, the fellows who are just the proletariat who are, angry and upset about and just want to just kill them. So it is really, it does a great job, I think, giving, and it was actually a worldwide hit, to give a sense of what English life was. Now, we were mentioning off pod that the first treatment of the film was done by Sterling Silliphant, who was an American writer. And I think we were talking about, there was talk about transferring the whole idea to the United States. I think they always wanted originally when in 1957, when they bought the rights, and they were talking in 1958 about making the film already, the idea was to have Ronald Colman as the protagonist. Now, let me just explain. The protagonist means he is the putative father of, this band of alien / super children. And he is also a professor, someone that the government consults. It's not clear exactly what his level or his area of expertise is.
I mean, in the book, he's presented as pretty much a know-it-all. In the remake in the 90s, they had Christopher Reeve playing him, and it was almost like, yes, this man is a Superman. He could do anything. And they had Mark Hamill as the priest.
They have a priest. Yes, right. The priest in the film is also quite clueless as to what this might portend. And the point
that was the reason actually that it was switched to England, because in America the Catholic Church is much more stronger than in England, where you have the Church of England, which is a little bit more liberal on a lot of things, and the Catholic Church was offended by the idea of this movie because they felt that it was representing perhaps some sort of making fun in a way, or a parody of the
virgin birth, and maybe Jesus himself is, if you think that God impregnated the Virgin Mary, then perhaps you should believe that aliens can impregnate everyone. Yeah, it's interesting that the film doesn't really, openly or blatantly make that type of connection.
Yeah, I mean, the film is much more subtle, obviously, than the book. In that time, they couldn't really be so explicit in the books about.
Well, I thought it was interesting, Yitzchak, that Ronald Colman at that time was married to Benita Hume, who was also an actress, his second marriage, or I think. After Colman died, Benita Hume took up with George Sanders. And George Sanders, of course, had made a career playing villains. I mean, there was a couple of early films he made in the late 30s and 40s where he played the hero, but I've talked about how he is really the most delicious villain that Hollywood almost ever produced. You could see Coleman in the role, but here, when Sanders sort of took up with Coleman's widow, it seems that she pushed him and pushed the studio to take Sanders in the lead, and the writers, the producers, and I think Wolf Rilla himself knew that they had to take Silliphant's treatment and actually insert so many of these little pieces of real verite of what English life was like. And viewing the film now, 50 something years after I saw it the first time, I was so taken by that. It seemed authentic. Now, you're right. This know-it-all professor, what is he doing there? He's obviously many, many years older than his beautiful young wife, who they can't seem to have children. And before they realize how everybody in the town is pregnant, there are some actually wonderful little moments between the two where, you could see that despite his stodgy intellectualism, how moved he is that perhaps his wife is pregnant and how caring he is for her. And you see a very sweet side of his. But, as the children are born, instead of reacting in outrage, his intellectual curiosity is stoked. And he begins to theorize, and he actually is brought in by those foreign service and others to try to figure out what's going on with this child. And when they talk about how the Russians have nuked the city where these beings have appeared, he says this is, of course, something that England can't do. We have a chance to perhaps learn from them. If we could perhaps turn them, if we can show them and guide them with their superior intellect, they could perhaps help us cure all the ills of the planet. They could actually help us advance. And there's even talk, if you remember, it's like the old, exposition scene where everybody says what they think it is. And someone says, maybe it's a mutation. And maybe this is this is how humanity has to go on to the next step, a la 2001 and Chariot of the Gods and other different types of things. That theory is raised. Then maybe what we need to do is recognize this gift from the gods, as it were, as a way to push towards the Ubermensch and the superhumanity that might proceed from it. The Sanders character, I think in the film, he's called Zellaby, as you say, it's taken from the book itself. He decides that he'll teach them, and of course, their leader refers to him as father. And of course, they can read minds.
That's something I think that was added that wasn't in the book, that they could read minds.
They could read people's minds. It actually becomes a very important plot point in the film. One of the things that the film does, again, deal with this idea where his son, of course it's not really his son, tells him that he could actually be like them. In other words, humanity could actually chuck off their emotional side and really sort of bring out and elevate their intellectual side and become just like them. One of the boy actually says to them, he says, "Father, you could be like us if you could somehow kill that emotional part of you." And of course, there's always been these theories that we only use 10% of our brain and things like that, whether those things are true or not. But that's another idea that the movie has, is that, yes, they might be from outer space, but again, are we becoming like this? Is our fascination with science pushing us to this? We could be this way, possibly. Maybe mankind is possible if he can somehow pare away his emotional, loving aspects and the things that draw him away from intellectual growth. He could be just like these kids. This is one of the things that the children say. The special effects, again, other than, the slow motion camera and stopping the camera, and freezing the frame, which are very obvious. Even the outfits that the kids wear, these blonde wigs that seem like pasted on. And I guess the special effect of when they're reading your mind or controlling you, of their eyes glowing in glorious black and white, which I guess is really, it has this really, again, when I saw it when I was 10 years old, of course, it was really scary. And that is really, if you take a look at many of the posters of the film, that's one of the things that they really pushed, their glowing eyes.
Right. Yeah. I remember the most. It was really quite scary for me also. I think the first time, I haven't seen it in a long time, but that was something that I recall very.
Right. And I guess let's talk about what makes that scary is the idea that these beautiful, innocent looking children, that really what's within them is so dark and evil, and something that we externally, we want to just love and cuddle and smile about, can really be the most devious and terrible. And of course, this was a similar you have in The Exorcist, of course, and in The Omen, where you have children taken over, progeny of the devil. And this is sort of, what was, part of the greatness and the horror of this film.
I mean, the whole thing with the eyes, it reminds me of, there was to me, the most frightening episode of Alfred Hitchcock Presents was based on Ray Bradbury actually wrote the script to that episode. And whenever on Nick at Night I would watch Alfred Hitchcock Presents, I always wanted to see the joke at the beginning and fall asleep before the show started, because if I fell asleep in the middle of the show, I was afraid I'd have nightmares. But if I made it to the end, usually there was some kind of a happy ending. And that was the one episode where there wasn't a happy ending, and it bothered me so much. And it also ended with a child with glowing eyes after eating some alien mushrooms. And it was combining the Invasion of the Body Snatchers and the Village of the Damned, all these stories together, kind of in a short episode of Alfred Hitchcock. But the character that Sanders is playing there, he has a real character arc there, because he's compassionate to these children. He cares about them, but he's also really kind of the one who's their protector. He's the one and their enabler in a sense. And
yes, that's what I mentioned. And
guilt over that.
So no, and that's similar to, Walter Matthau's character in Failsafe, where you have, pure science saying we can deal with a nuclear holocaust, let's go on to the next stage. He really is cold in that way. And he's ready to protect clearly, murderous beings for the sake of something greater. Again, you go back to Alien, where you have the company really wants to save this being, even though it's one of the probably the most destructive, terrible force in the world. Actually, Alien is very similar to the Village of the Damned, where it takes on the form, this being takes on the form of whatever it impregnates. Of course, it changes it in a grotesque way. There's even, I think, some alien films where dogs get infected. So this is very similar. Somehow this intelligence needs, the human to be the host in order to produce this, this monstrous, angelic looking being. I think that's really, I guess, what makes it a little bit different than Alien, because in Alien, you definitely, you see so a very
beautiful, and it's but you have a lot of these movies where they do want to protect, there's always a sign. Well, there's another example, the scientist who wants to protect this creature that almost kills him.
Yeah. Again, over here, of course, they are children, and half of them, seem to have at least had the DNA of their mothers, although they are astonishingly similar looking. But it definitely seems like, the aspect of them are clearly human, because, they couldn't have been formed without, the human contribution. And I think that's part of really what makes it different than, it's just some sort of being that lands, whether it's ET or whatever it is that we need to, discover or probe. The enemy is really within us. But, when Sanders realizes that, sort of like, the Vilna Gaon, couldn't be taught anymore after a certain age. Sanders realizes that he's not going to be able to do much with them. They are ready to move on. Although he has knowledge, and in some ways they are thirsty for it, they are going to outstrip him in their thinking and in their capacity to understand. And he realizes that he needs to do something. And it's at that point that, he concocts a plan where he can destroy them. And he can do it in a way where he can use another power. And again, spoilers ahead if you want to skip the next 4 or 5 minutes. But basically, he uses the power of subterfuge, of being able to, the power of imagination, right? What he does is, instead of, we say, what are you thinking? So do we think in thought pictures, or do we think in ideas? So if Zellaby is thinking, now I've got to kill them, now the bomb that I planted in my suitcase is going to go off, they obviously will realize that, and who knows what they'll do. They'll make him, take the bomb and, eliminate it, or swallow the bomb, whatever they can do in terms of their mind control ability. But what he does, Yitzchak, is he uses a picture. He pictures something, which again is a different faculty of the mind. He pictures that brick wall, right? And when they try to read his mind, all they get is an image, not an idea. They don't get words. And I think in that way, although you would think it's just
very Jungian type of like archetypal, idea.
Right. And the which I would say is tethered not only to our imaginative faculty, but the aspect, the stubbornness, the ability, the power of the will. Again, you can have an intellect that is maybe moved by a certain prerogative that it must continue to exist or kill to exist or whatever it is, like the alien in Alien. But here, what Sanders uses to very vanquish seemingly them is the ability of fortitude to trick them and to actually use human gumption and determination, plus the imaginative faculty. And I think in that way, it is, I don't know if that was Wyndham's idea, but Silliphant and Rilla and whoever wrote this film, I think are really implying and really saying this, that we do, yes, we should recognize this intellectual aspect of ourselves, but we also have this other thing which can save us. And that is something that could allow us beyond seichel, so to speak, to be unbending, to be courageous, to be willing to die for a greater cause. All those things are things which I think are the symbol of that brick wall, that image of human creativity in a way. Anyway, that's, I think, perhaps a reading.
I think part of it is also his recognition of his responsibility, that he has. Oh,
yes, he realizes that he has let this happen. People have died because of him. Yes, but again, Yitzchak, he erred in that way. It is. You're right. Part of it is a penance, as he sends his wife away and his young wife away and his brother-in-law. It really is. It can be seen, and it really was a sleeper hit. The sequel is built on the fact that when, and again, spoilers here, so you might want to not listen here. The sequel is built on the fact that as the building explodes, and as you see, as the movie, as you see here, the big letters, the end, you can see in the fire and flames of the schoolhouse where, seemingly they've all been charred to death, the eyes seem to float away as if whatever supernatural or beyond or space powers that were put into these bodies can somehow float and find other hosts. And I don't remember. I remember watching the beginning of Children of the Damned, and it really is so inferior to this film.
I only remember seeing it once. It was
I think this is, again, it's in a way very much a product of this, this middle of Cold War, this England, determining about what it was about, trying to sort of like, think about it's what made it different than the U.S., different than Russia, different than the power players. It really is very much a slice of its time. Look, there's no question that, Sanders continued to be active in film in the 60s. He was in with Peter Sellers in The Shot in the Dark. And I guess the first time I actually heard him was when I went to see The Jungle Book in 1967, where he played Shere Khan, who is what a great villain that was too, as well. The Jungle Book is really underappreciated. It's most people hate the Jungle Book, of course, because of the very inferior animation compared to Pinocchio and some of these other, incredible works. But
it was already when Disney wasn't around anymore.
Yeah, right. Disney had died, but the voice acting in the Jungle Book is really fantastic. Whether it's Lou Harris or Sebastian Cabot or Sanders throwing Holloway, I think it just has, it's really just it's really great. And, Sanders, he, unfortunately, at the end of his life, he suffered from dementia, but, it's always terrible when you have somebody who really, of such obvious intelligence, losing it the way he did. But, I think this is one of his more interesting roles. Again, he doesn't really have to do that much in terms of, you say there is a character arc, but he doesn't have like many great soliloquies, but I just think he is really the glue that keeps this baby together. It might be one of the reasons why the sequel didn't really take hold. And again, it probably should have been left alone.
The author, he decided not to make a sequel.
Yeah, John Wyndham. Wolf Rilla, I don't believe made anything that was, I'm sure he had some work in a number of television programs and films. I know that he worked in the BBC, and I'm sure that you could probably find in his filmography interesting things. But I think here he really does a wonderful job staying out of the way. A lot of great shots, a lot of great setups and angles. He did make the movie Cairo in 1963. He brought Sanders back.
Sanders, yeah.
And Sanders was in that as well.
Yeah.
Cairo, of course, is a remake of The Asphalt Jungle, a caper crime film. This was in many ways, Rilla's top film. The film that most people will remember him. And again, part of what makes great science fiction horror films, and putting them together like this, is lack of, you don't need exposition. You have enough great acting, and the directors and writers came up with just the proper amount of special effects not to overwhelm the story. And I think in many ways, it's a template for what can still be very successful. Horror, sci-fi. Again, you have, the Stephen King. This is really Stephen King's area.
I think this is more well done than anything King ever did. I'm not a big King fan, but
well, the problem I think with Stephen King is he overwrites. John Wyndham, I think, writes in a succinct, interesting way, a dynamic way. I think King, King is in love with his own characters to the point that he,
I've heard critics say that Wyndham also overwrote, and that the movie actually did a better job than the book.
Listen, it's been years since I've read them, but we're comparing them to King. I mean, Stephen King is, but this is the area of sci-fi horror together, and
and also the something that King often does is that he doesn't explain. It just is, and he's probably influenced very highly by this.
Yes. So anyway, it's really out there, and I think for our listeners, I think this is something which we hope you'll discover, and we hope that you'll appreciate it as much as Yitzhak than I can, because I think we could just go on and on extolling it. So watch your step on the way out, everybody. We'll catch you next week. Be well. Thanks for joining us for another episode from the Yeshiva of Newark at IDT Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on your favorite podcast app so you don't miss a single episode.